You don't need more motivation, more discipline, or another explanation for why your life hasn't shifted in the way you expected, because the issue was never that you weren't trying hard enough. It's that you were unknowingly obeying a law you were never taught to recognize, a law so precise that once you see it, you can no longer unsee it. And that law is this: resistance repeats, acceptance releases. The harder you push against a pattern, the more structure you give it. The more you fight an experience, the more coherent it becomes in your life. And if that sentence lands with a quiet recognition rather than surprise, it's because you've already lived the evidence of it. Look closely at your own experience for a moment, not philosophically, but practically. Think about the thing you have tried hardest to get rid of: anxiety, financial pressure, a recurring relationship dynamic, a sense of stagnation, a version of yourself you keep trying to outgrow. Notice what happened every time you applied force, every time you resisted, every time you told yourself this should not be happening. It didn't dissolve, it didn't weaken, it adapted, it persisted. In many cases, it intensified, and that wasn't because you were doing something wrong. It's because resistance does not remove a pattern. Resistance stabilizes it. Resistance gives it repetition. Resistance gives it identity. Here is the point most people never hear clearly enough to let it change them. Consciousness does not create based on preference. It creates based on coherence. Whatever you consistently hold your attention on, whatever you charge with emotion, whatever you struggle against internally, you are not pushing it away, you are reinforcing it. The field does not register your desire to escape an experience. It registers your fixation on it. It registers the tension, the vigilance, the emotional pressure. And pressure is coherence. Pressure is repetition. This is why effort so often feels like movement without progress. You are moving, but you are moving in a loop. This is the quantum law of coherence, and it operates whether you believe in it or not. Resistance repeats, acceptance releases. Acceptance releases because it removes the stabilizing force that keeps a pattern intact. Resistance keeps you in constant relationship with the very thing you want gone. Acceptance breaks the relationship. It withdraws the charge. It collapses the loop. And if part of you is already reacting to this with discomfort, that reaction itself is part of what this law is pointing to. Most people have been taught that change comes from effort, correction, control, or improvement. Fix the problem, eliminate the weakness, overcome the pattern. But effort applied in resistance does not transform reality, it rehearses it. Every time you mentally argue with your circumstances, every time you tense against what is already here, every time you say this shouldn't be happening, you are not exiting the pattern, you are re-entering it. You are reminding your nervous system, your attention, and your identity that this is the reality you are oriented around. What makes this difficult to see is that resistance feels active, it feels responsible, it feels like engagement. Acceptance, by contrast, feels counterintuitive, it feels like inaction, it feels like letting something stay. But this is where most people misunderstand the law entirely. Acceptance is not an agreement with reality. Acceptance is the removal of internal opposition. It is the moment you stop feeding a structure with your attention. It is the moment coherence shifts, and coherence, not effort, is what determines what repeats. If this sounds abstract, notice how immediate your body responds to it. Resistance always has a somatic signature: tightness, pressure, contraction, vigilance. Acceptance has one too: a softening, a release, a drop in internal noise. Your body already understands this law even if your mind has never named it. You've felt moments where the instant you stopped fighting an experience, something shifted on its own. This is not about becoming passive, this is about becoming precise. Precision is knowing when action reinforces a loop and when it dissolves it. Precision is knowing that you cannot fight your way into coherence. You can only stop interfering with it. And that distinction is subtle enough that most people miss it their entire lives, repeating the same cycles under different names, convinced they are changing when they are actually rehearsing. If you are still here, it's because some part of you already knows that struggle has not been the answer, that effort has not produced the freedom it promised, and that the pattern you want to escape has been held in place by the very resistance meant to remove it. This is not a motivational message. This is not a call to positive thinking. This is the statement of a law you are already inside of. Resistance repeats, acceptance releases. And once you understand why this is true, you can no longer create in the same way again. Because now the real question isn't, how do I change my life, but where am I unknowingly stabilizing what I want to end, and what would happen if I stopped holding it together? To understand why resistance repeats and acceptance releases, you have to stop thinking about consciousness as something that merely reacts to reality and begin seeing it as the mechanism through which reality stabilizes itself, because nothing in your experience exists independently of the way it is being observed. At the most fundamental level, experience does not form first and then get noticed by consciousness. Observation is the act that gives experience its shape, its duration, and its persistence. Whatever is consistently observed with emotional charge does not simply appear, it coheres, it organizes itself into a repeatable structure. This is why patterns feel solid. They are not solid by nature, they are solid by attention. In quantum mechanics, this is described through the observer effect, but long before physics tried to formalize it, your nervous system already knew it. The act of observation collapses possibility into form. But what matters is not just that you observe something, it is how you observe it. Observation without charge is fleeting. Observation with charge is binding. Resistance is charged observation. It is attention infused with fear, urgency, frustration, and self-protection. And charged observation is not neutral, it is creative. It tells the field, this matters, this must be maintained, this must stay relevant. The field does not distinguish between attraction and avoidance. It only responds to coherence. This is where most people misunderstand manifestation and change at a fundamental level. They believe consciousness responds to preference, to desire, to intention statements, or to words spoken with enough repetition. But consciousness does not respond to language. It responds to pattern stability. If you say you want peace while constantly monitoring anxiety, checking for it, resisting it, bracing against it, and narrating its presence, the dominant signal being broadcast is not peace, it is anxiety under surveillance. And surveillance is coherence. This is why resistance feels exhausting. You are not just dealing with the pattern, you are actively powering it. Think about what resistance actually requires. It requires constant attention. It requires scanning. It requires judgment. It requires mental rehearsal. It requires emotional tension. All of that is sustained observation. And sustained observation is exactly what collapses a probability into a lived experience. When you resist a pattern, you are not trying to escape it. You are staying in relationship with it. You are making it relevant. You are confirming it as part of your identity. This is why people say things like, I am an anxious person, I am bad with money, this always happens to me. Resistance eventually becomes self-definition. Acceptance works differently because acceptance is not observation with charge. Acceptance is observation without interference. It is seeing what is present without adding emotional pressure, narrative urgency, or identity attachment. When acceptance is real, not performative, something subtle but decisive happens. The nervous system disengages from vigilance. Attention loosens. The pattern is no longer being monitored for survival significance. And when significance drops, coherence breaks. The pattern is no longer held together by the observer. It begins to destabilize on its own. This is why acceptance feels like relief, even before anything changes externally. Relief is not the result of circumstances shifting. Relief is the result of coherence dissolving. You are no longer tightening around the pattern. You are no longer holding it in place. This does not mean the pattern vanishes instantly every time. What it means is that it loses the energetic reinforcement that made it repeatable. It loses the observer tension that made it self-sustaining. Without that reinforcement, it either changes form, weakens, or exits altogether. The reason this feels counterintuitive is because you were taught that change requires force, and that force applied internally feels like resistance. But force is not the same as coherence. Force creates interference. Interference creates noise. Noise creates instability, but not the kind that frees you. It creates oscillation. This is why people feel stuck between states, cycling through progress and relapse, clarity and confusion, motivation and collapse. They are oscillating between resistance and desire without ever entering coherence. Coherence is a state where attention, emotion, and identity are aligned. In coherence, there is no internal argument with what is present. That does not mean complacency. It means clarity. And clarity changes everything. From clarity, action arises without struggle. From resistance, action is reactive. Reactive action tries to fix the pattern while staying oriented to it. Coherent action moves without reinforcing what it leaves behind. This is why action taken from acceptance feels lighter and more effective, even when it involves difficult steps. Your body is the easiest place to see this law operating in real time. Resistance always contracts the body. Acceptance always softens it. This is physiological. When the body contracts, perception narrows. When perception narrows, the range of available responses collapses. You become more predictable, more habitual, more looped. Acceptance expands perception. Expansion increases optionality. Optionality allows different outcomes to emerge. This is why acceptance precedes change rather than follows it. This is also why positive thinking fails when it is layered on top of resistance. You cannot think your way out of a pattern you are physically holding in place. Affirmations spoken over tension do not create coherence. They create contradiction. And contradiction stabilizes nothing. It creates static. The field cannot respond cleanly to static. It responds to dominant signals. Resistance is dominant because it is emotionally charged and continuously rehearsed. Desire is often weak because it is abstract, occasional, and disconnected from the body. When you understand this, the law stops being moral or motivational and becomes mechanical. Resistance repeats because it maintains observation. Acceptance releases because it removes it. This is not about becoming indifferent to your life. It is about becoming precise with your attention. Precision means knowing that what you track, you train. What you monitor, you maintain. What you fight, you feed. And what you allow, without charge, loses its grip. If this is landing now, it is because you are already sensing the difference between effort and coherence in your own experience. You are remembering moments when things shifted not because you pushed harder, but because you stopped pushing altogether. Those moments were not accidents, they were glimpses of this law operating without interference. And once you see that, you start to realize that the real question is not how do I create what I want, but where am I unknowingly sustaining what I no longer need? Because the mechanism that repeats patterns is not outside you. It is not fate. It is not conditioning alone. It is the relationship between your attention and your emotional charge. And that relationship can change, but not through force. It changes through coherence. And yet, even knowing this, most people remain trapped in repetition, which means there is still something deeper we need to look at. If understanding the mechanism were enough, insight alone would dissolve patterns, and the moment you grasp the law of coherence, your life would reorganize effortlessly. But that is not what happens for most people, and the reason is not lack of intelligence or commitment. It is that resistance does not only operate at the level of circumstances, it operates at the level of identity, quietly shaping what you allow yourself to be, feel, want, and express. This is the layer where repetition becomes personal, where patterns stop looking like events and start looking like fate, and where most attempts at change fail without anyone understanding why. What you consciously resist in your life is often obvious, but what you unconsciously resist in yourself is far more powerful. You may say you want freedom, abundance, intimacy, creativity, or peace, but if parts of you associate those states with danger, judgment, loss, or responsibility, resistance is already active beneath the surface. This resistance is not loud. It does not announce itself. It hides inside values, coping strategies, and self-images that once kept you safe. And because it is unconscious, it broadcasts continuously, shaping your reality without your permission or awareness. This is why patterns repeat even when you do everything right. You change habits, you learn new frameworks, you practice awareness, but the same emotional configurations keep resurfacing in different forms The environment changes, the faces change, the circumstances change, the feeling does not. That feeling is not a coincidence. It is the signature of an unaccepted part of the self still seeking expression. Resistance at the identity level does not disappear because you understand it. It disappears when it is no longer rejected. Every part of you that was once silenced, shamed, or suppressed continues to operate in the background as a stabilizing force. The need that was labeled too much, the anger that felt unsafe, the desire that seemed selfish, the vulnerability that once led to pain. These parts do not vanish when ignored. They adapt. They find indirect ways to appear in your life, and because they are not consciously accepted, they emerge as external circumstances rather than internal experiences. This is how internal resistance becomes external repetition. The field does not punish you for rejecting parts of yourself. It reflects the rejection. If you resist your own need for rest, you will encounter exhaustion in circumstances you cannot control. If you resist your own desire for power, you will experience powerlessness through others. If you resist your own anger, you will attract anger in your environment. These are not moral consequences, they are coherence effects. The field mirrors what is disallowed internally so it can be experienced externally. This is the deeper reason acceptance dissolves patterns. Acceptance is not about circumstances alone. It is about self-relationship. When you accept an internal experience, even one you do not like, you stop broadcasting opposition. The moment opposition ends, coherence shifts. The pattern no longer needs to appear externally to be recognized. It has already been met. And what is met internally no longer needs to repeat externally. This is why acceptance can feel threatening at first. Accepting a part of yourself you have spent years rejecting feels like losing control, but in reality, it is the restoration of coherence. Resistance fractures identity. Acceptance integrates it, and integration is the state in which consciousness stops leaking energy into repetition. The more fragmented your identity, the more places resistance can hide. The more integrated your identity, the fewer loops remain active. Most people believe their circumstances define who they are, but in reality, who they allow themselves to be defines which circumstances can stabilize. Identity is not a story you tell about yourself. It is the range of states you permit yourself to inhabit without resistance. Anything outside that range will either be avoided or projected outward. And projection always returns as pattern. You may notice this most clearly in relationships. The traits you judge most harshly in others are often the traits you have learned to suppress in yourself. Control, need, selfishness, emotional intensity, detachment, sensitivity. Resistance to these traits does not remove them, it externalizes them. The pattern persists because the coherence remains intact. The loop closes because nothing inside has shifted yet. And this is also why manifestation techniques fail at the identity level. You can visualize abundance all you want, but if you resist your own desire, your own ambition, your own authority, or your own capacity to receive, the frequency you broadcast is not abundance. It is contraction disguised as effort. The field responds to contraction by repeating experiences that confirm it, not to teach you a lesson, but to maintain coherence. Acceptance at this level is not an affirmation. It is a willingness to let an internal state exist without judgment. It is the moment you stop editing yourself for safety, and when you stop editing yourself, the signal you broadcast becomes simpler, cleaner, more coherent. Simpler signals collapse more cleanly. Cleaner signals dissolve noise. This is why acceptance creates clarity while resistance creates confusion. The paradox is that the parts of yourself you fear will destroy you if accepted are often the parts holding your coherence together. They were never the problem, the rejection was. When rejection ends, the part either integrates and softens or releases entirely. It no longer needs to operate in extreme or indirect ways. The loop breaks not because you fought harder, but because you stopped fighting at all. If this feels intimate, it should. Patterns do not repeat because life is against you. They repeat because parts of you are still waiting to be met without opposition. And the moment that meeting happens, something profound shifts. The pattern loses its job. It no longer needs to appear. It no longer has a function. This is the level where coherence stops being a concept and starts becoming lived experience. You stop asking why things keep happening to you and start noticing what inside you is still being resisted, not to fix it, not to remove it, but to meet it. And what is met with acceptance no longer needs to return. Yet even here, there is another layer that changes how this law operates in the world around you. Because once coherence stabilizes internally, reality itself begins to reorganize, and that is what we need to look at next. Once resistance loosens at the level of identity, something subtle but unmistakable begins to happen in your external life, because the structure that was holding the pattern together no longer exists in the same way. This is the moment where acceptance reveals its true nature, not as a mindset, not as an emotional bypass, but as a dissolving force. Acceptance removes the tension that made the pattern intelligible to the field. Without that tension, the pattern loses definition. It becomes unstable. It can no longer repeat with the same certainty. This is where many people misinterpret what acceptance actually does. They assume acceptance means the situation remains unchanged, that nothing moves, that nothing improves. But that assumption comes from confusing acceptance with resignation. Resignation is frozen resistance. Acceptance is fluid clarity. Resignation says, this is all there is. Acceptance says, this is what is here now. That distinction changes everything. Acceptance does not stop movement. It restores movement. It removes the internal obstruction that was locking experience into a loop. When resistance is present, perception narrows, you see fewer options, you anticipate the same outcomes, you behave predictably. This predictability is coherence of the wrong kind. It keeps reality repeating familiar shapes. Acceptance expands perception. Expansion does not guarantee a specific outcome, but it restores variability. And variability is where change becomes possible. Without variability, nothing new can emerge. Acceptance creates the space where variability can re-enter the system. This is why acceptance often precedes unexpected shifts rather than planned ones. You stop gripping the situation and suddenly a conversation happens differently. A decision feels obvious instead of forced. A door you were pushing against quietly opens from the other side. These moments feel like relief, because relief is the sensation of interference ending. You are no longer fighting the current of experience. You are allowing it to reorganize. Action taken from acceptance has a different quality than action taken from resistance. Resistance-based action is reactive. It is driven by urgency, fear, and the need to escape discomfort. Even when it appears productive, it carries the imprint of what it is trying to fix. Acceptance-based action is responsive. It arises from clarity rather than tension. It does not need to prove anything. It does not need to hurry. And because it is not oriented around the problem, it does not reinforce the problem as it moves. This is why acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Precision means knowing when not to act. It means knowing when observation alone is enough to destabilize a pattern. It means recognizing that not every movement is an improvement, and not every pause is avoidance. Acceptance allows you to sense what actually wants to happen, instead of forcing what you think should happen. Many people struggle here because they are afraid that if they accept their circumstances, they will lose the motivation to change them. But motivation driven by resistance is not sustainable. It burns energy without creating coherence. When acceptance replaces resistance, motivation changes form. It becomes curiosity. It becomes responsiveness. It becomes alignment. You are no longer pushing yourself forward. You are allowing yourself to move where coherence already exists. This is where the law of coherence becomes visible in everyday life. Patterns begin to soften. They do not always disappear dramatically. Sometimes they simply lose their emotional weight. Sometimes they stop triggering the same reactions. Sometimes they dissolve quietly without you noticing until later. What matters is not the speed of change, but the quality of movement. The system is no longer locked. Notice how different this feels from effort-based change. Effort keeps you oriented toward what is wrong. Acceptance frees attention to notice what is possible. Effort demands a result. Acceptance allows emergence. Effort reinforces identity around struggle. Acceptance loosens identity altogether. And when identity loosens, the field responds differently. This is also why acceptance often brings a sense of trust that was missing before. Not blind trust, not optimism, but a grounded sense that you do not need to manage reality so tightly for it to unfold. That trust is recognition. Recognition that coherence does not require control. It requires alignment. And alignment cannot be forced. When you accept what is present without resistance, you stop feeding the timeline you are currently in. That timeline loses coherence. At the same time, new configurations begin to appear, not because you imagined them, but because your perception is no longer locked onto a single outcome. You begin to notice opportunities that were invisible before. You respond differently. Others respond differently to you. The pattern shifts because the observer has shifted. This is where the law stops being internal and becomes relational. Your acceptance does not just change how you feel, it changes how others interact with you. Resistance creates friction. Acceptance creates openness. Friction invites opposition. Openness invites response. These are not metaphysical claims. They are observable dynamics. You have seen them play out in conversations, in negotiations, in moments of conflict that soften the instant you stop defending yourself. Acceptance also changes timing. Resistance creates urgency. Urgency collapses perception into short-term fixes. Acceptance restores patience. Patience allows events to align rather than collide. This is why acceptance often brings solutions that feel effortless in hindsight. They were always available, but resistance prevented you from seeing them. As coherence stabilizes, you begin to experience a different relationship with effort altogether. Effort becomes optional rather than compulsory. You act when action feels clean. You wait when waiting feels right. You no longer mistake tension for progress. This is the shift from force to flow, not as a spiritual slogan, but as a functional reality. If you are still listening, it is because you are already sensing that this way of moving through life feels more truthful than constant struggle. You are recognizing that many of the things you thought required effort actually required release, that many of the changes you sought through control were waiting for coherence instead. And yet, even here, there is one final resistance that keeps many people from fully living this law. Because acceptance of circumstances and acceptance of self are not the same thing. And the moment you accept yourself as the one participating in the creation of your experience, something even deeper begins to shift. At this stage, the law of coherence stops being something you understand and starts becoming something you live, because the shift is no longer about dissolving a single pattern, it is about changing the way you relate to experience itself. This is where acceptance becomes embodiment, not as a practice you perform, but as a state you occupy. You are no longer applying acceptance to specific problems as a technique. You are allowing it to become the default orientation of your consciousness. And when that happens, the way reality responds to you begins to change in ways that are difficult to explain but impossible to ignore. Embodiment means that acceptance is no longer something you do after resistance fails. It is the place you start from. You notice what arises without immediately classifying it as a threat, a mistake, or a setback. You allow sensations, emotions, and circumstances to register without tightening around them. This makes you available to respond rather than react, available to sense what is actually needed rather than what habit demands. And availability is the foundation of coherence. This is where most approaches to change miss the mark because they attempt to overlay new behaviors onto an old internal posture. They try to act confident while bracing internally. They try to think positively while contracting emotionally. They try to move forward while still resisting where they are. This split creates noise. Noise creates instability. Instability creates repetition. Embodiment resolves the split. It aligns internal state with external movement, and alignment collapses loops that effort could not break. When acceptance becomes embodied, decision-making changes. You no longer make choices primarily to escape discomfort. You make them from clarity. Clarity does not guarantee certainty, but it eliminates compulsion. You stop choosing out of fear of what might happen and start choosing from a sense of what fits. This subtle shift alters everything. Actions taken from fear carry fear into their outcomes. Actions taken from coherence carry coherence forward. This is also where time begins to feel different. Resistance creates a sense of urgency, as if something must change immediately or everything will collapse. Acceptance dissolves that pressure. Without pressure, time opens. You are no longer racing against an imagined future or replaying a painful past. You are present, and presence is where coherence naturally stabilizes. From presence, small actions have disproportionate impact because they are not diluted by internal conflict. You may notice that when you stop resisting, you stop over-explaining yourself, you stop defending your choices, you stop proving your worth. These behaviors were never signs of confidence or responsibility. They were signs of internal opposition. Acceptance removes the need to justify your existence. You begin to move with a quiet certainty that does not need validation. Others feel this shift even if they cannot name it. They respond differently. Conversations change tone, dynamics soften or reorganize. This is not coincidence. It is coherence made visible. Embodied acceptance also reveals where action is still required. Contrary to popular belief, acceptance does not eliminate the need for action. It refines it. When resistance drops, you can feel the difference between avoidance and rest, between patience and stagnation, between alignment and delay. Action that arises from acceptance feels clean. It does not leave residue. It does not create new problems while solving old ones. It feels complete even before the outcome arrives. This is the point where many people experience what feels like a sudden shift in trajectory. Opportunities appear. Insights land without effort. The same environment begins to yield different results. This is not because the world suddenly changed. It is because you are no longer reinforcing the old pattern through your orientation toward it. The timeline you were stabilizing loses coherence. Another becomes accessible. You do not jump timelines through imagination. You shift timelines through embodiment. Embodiment means you are no longer rehearsing who you used to be in every moment of reaction. You are not dragging the past forward through resistance. You are not feeding feared futures through vigilance. You are inhabiting the present without opposition, and the present, when unopposed, has a remarkable capacity to reorganize itself. This is where reality begins to feel responsive rather than rigid. As acceptance stabilizes, you may also notice an unexpected side effect. A sense of responsibility emerges, not as blame, but as agency. You begin to see how your internal posture has been shaping your experience all along. This recognition is not meant to burden you, it is meant to free you. Responsibility here does not mean fault, it means participation. You are not separate from the field you are observing. You are part of the coherence that gives it form. This realization can be unsettling because it removes the comfort of believing that life is happening to you independently of your orientation toward it. But it also removes helplessness. You are no longer waiting for conditions to change so that you can feel different. You are recognizing that feeling different is what changes the conditions. Not through force, through coherence. This is where acceptance reveals its deepest function. It does not just dissolve unwanted patterns, it reveals your role as the stabilizing factor in any experience. You begin to see that you have been holding certain realities in place, not because you wanted them, but because you were oriented toward them through resistance. And once you see that, you cannot unknow it. The struggle loses its justification. The loop loses its authority. Yet there is still one final integration that completes this shift, one acceptance that most people avoid longer than any other because it requires letting go of a familiar identity altogether. It is the acceptance of yourself as the creator of coherence, not through control, but through presence. And that is where this journey reaches its final turn. The final acceptance is not about circumstances, patterns, or even identity traits. It is the acceptance of yourself as the point of coherence through which experience stabilizes or dissolves, and this is where the law completes itself. Most people can accept situations eventually, many can even accept parts of themselves, but very few are willing to accept that they have been participating in the creation of their experience all along, not through conscious choice or intention, but through orientation. This resistance to being the creator is the deepest resistance of all, because it protects a familiar identity, the identity of someone to whom life happens, rather than someone through whom life moves. This is about recognition. Recognition that consciousness does not sit outside reality, observing it from a distance, but is embedded within it, shaping it through coherence. When you accept this, something profound happens. You stop fighting the idea that you should have been different, known more, done better, or chosen differently. You see that everything unfolded according to the coherence available at the time. And with that recognition, self-judgment loses its grip. This is where victimhood dissolves without confrontation. Victimhood requires the belief that reality is acting independently of you, imposing patterns without your participation. Coherence reveals something quieter and more empowering. You were never punished, you were reflected. And reflection changes the moment orientation changes. There is nothing to fix in the past. There is only a present coherence to inhabit now. When this acceptance lands, the urgency to change softens. Not because change is no longer possible, but because it is no longer necessary to force it. You stop asking, when will this end, and start noticing how it is already shifting. The nervous system relaxes, attention widens, the field responds differently because you are no longer broadcasting interference. This is what it means to live as a coherent observer rather than a struggling one. At this level, acceptance is no longer something you apply to specific moments. It becomes the background state. You meet experiences as they arise without immediately turning them into problems to solve. You respond when response is needed. You wait when waiting is true. And life begins to feel less like a series of obstacles and more like a conversation. Not because everything becomes easy, but because nothing needs to be fought into submission anymore. This is where the opening law returns, no longer as a concept, but as lived truth. Resistance repeats because it keeps you entangled with what you are trying to escape. Acceptance releases because it untangles attention from struggle. You are not letting life happen to you, you are letting it move. And movement, when unobstructed, always finds a new form. You may notice that after this recognition, certain patterns no longer hold emotional charge, even if they still appear briefly. They feel thinner, less convincing, less personal. This is the sign that coherence has shifted. The pattern is no longer being stabilized by identity. It has no anchor, it fades, and new experiences begin to stabilize. Before we close this transmission, there is an important threshold to acknowledge. If you are still here, something in you has already shifted. You are not relating to effort, struggle, or change in the same way you were at the beginning. The version of you who arrived is not the version who is listening now. To anchor this shift, we use ritual. Speaking or writing a simple declaration signals to your nervous system and to the field that orientation has changed. This is for you. It is a way of marking that you are no longer choosing resistance as your primary mode of engagement. If this transmission resonated, and if you feel the quiet clarity that comes when struggle loosens, I invite you to take a moment and write a short declaration in the comments. Write this to anchor the shift. I choose acceptance. I release resistance. And if this way of seeing, this way of moving, this way of relating to reality feels familiar rather than new, consider subscribing to the Codex of Light as a signal that you are ready to continue exploring coherence. Because nothing needs to be forced anymore. What you resist repeats, what you accept releases. And the moment you stop holding reality together, it finally has room to change.